Last month, I discussed protein and its importance in metabolism, recovery, muscle protein synthesis, and appetite. So this month, I'm going to discuss carbs, a macro that, like fat, has been heavily vilified. I think protein is actually the only macro or macronutrient that hasn't been vilified. So no one has anything bad to say about proteins. All right, so with carbs, I'm going to talk a little bit about what they are, why they matter, and a little bit of a guide to intake. I think the reason they've been vilified is because when you look at bad diets or the standard American diet or diets that are considered unhealthy, they're usually really high in refined and processed foods like crackers and cookies and chips and stuff that's easy to grab, which are also foods that are high in carbs. So I think that's why carbs have been vilified, and people, when they decide they're going to get healthy again, one of their first steps can typically be, I'm going to go on a low carb diet, which typically means they're going to strip out all the sugars, all the white flours, all the kind of junk food. So I think that might be why carbs have been labeled as the bad guy and the stuff to take out of your diet. From a molecular standpoint, carbs are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, thus the abbreviation CHO. Now, most of you have heard the terminology simple and complex carbs. And remember, the simplest form of carbohydrates are called monosaccharides, or single sugar. Two examples of this are fructose, which is the sugar found in fruit, and glucose, which is the primary fuel source of the body. Now, more complex carbs, such as those found in dairy, called lactose, are just simple sugars strung together and are called disaccharides. So we've got to note that carbs are our body's most readily available form of energy, which makes them super important. But note, important doesn't mean essential. Our bodies actually can run off of fat, as we all know, and can run off of protein through a process called gluconeogenesis, or the conversion of protein into sugar. But both of these can be very inefficient. So always remember that each one of the macros has their own specific role that they're really good at. So protein's good at a bunch of things. Fat's great at other stuff. Carbs have their own role, specifically in energy production, muscle hypertrophy, and recovery from super intense training. So what I've found in my coaching over the years is that a lot of folks have either knowingly or unknowingly put themselves on a low carb diet, and they're trying to train hard, lean out, and gain muscle. And that gets super difficult and can lead to chronic fatigue, crashing in the afternoon, trouble sleeping, and just an overall challenge putting on muscle. There's so much to say about carb and intake, but I want to address three types of people and categories of folks that actually do benefit from a lower carb intake versus moderate versus a fairly high intake. Okay, so category one are folks that have severe blood sugar management issues. They're pre-diabetic, or they're just super obese and have high inflammatory markers, or neurological conditions like epilepsy. These folks will benefit from a low carb diet until all of that is under control, and typically carb intake can be 10% or less of calories. I don't work a lot with those types of people, but that's one category of folks that a practitioner would look at those folks and go, okay, a high carbohydrate diet isn't needed until that individual is just more metabolically healthy and they're active and their blood sugar issues are under control. So that's like type 1. The second group of folks that fit into the category that you'd consider moderate carb intake, like this is ballpark 15 to 30% or so, are those that are generally healthy and just need to maintain their weight, but they might have challenges like high cholesterol, for example. You typically put those folks on a moderate carb diet until some of these issues were regulated and they're back training again. The third group of folks are those that I work most commonly with, and it's folks that are fairly healthy or they're becoming more so. They're training, they're trying to build muscle and lose fat. They may have put themselves on a low carb diet quite some time ago, and they kind of go, well, this isn't working anymore. They're feeling like their training is stagnant. They're wondering why they're not sleeping well, and they're tired all the time. And these are also generally folks that are building and have built a faster metabolism. So when I take a look and I go, oh, wow, okay, well, 5 of the reasons that you're struggling are probably because your carb intake is less than 100 grams a day. And I've really seen that. And it's particularly a problem when you're dealing with folks that are in very hard charging classes and they're strength athletes. So just a little bit of a summary of these 3 types and how to start to figure out what category you might want to place yourself in. If you're currently on a sedentary side and you have problems with blood sugar management and or you're pre-diabetic, you're going to want to put yourself in the category that is on the lower carb side. So think, instead of pastas and breads, you're going to want to lean more into vegetables and fruit, for example, and get your activity levels up until your blood sugar levels stabilize. And then you could move into category 2, which are folks who are generally active, so go for walks on a daily basis. They're pretty healthy, besides maybe some cholesterol issues. I'm not implying that that is generally healthy, but it's common. You can move yourself up a category into a little bit of a higher carb intake. If you are a hard charging athlete, you're training multiple times a week, and you're really on that quest to build muscle and lose fat, believe it or not, you can do it, and you should be doing it on a higher carb diet, because your recovery will be greatly enhanced, let alone better energy production and efficiency and better sleep. If you're in that third group, you'd want to actually look at your macros and start to allocate about 40 to 50%, potentially more, of your total caloric intake from carbs. And again, that's on the higher side. So just a bit of a summary as to what category to place yourself in. Okay, so just to summarize carbs a little bit, again, in general, is they shouldn't be vilified, and I think the reason that they have been is because they're also affiliated with diets that are high in processed foods and crackers and the grab and go stuff, which we certainly don't need more of in our society. So I think that's really why carbs have gotten a bad rap. But if you structure your diet properly, you'll have a good intake of protein, fats, and carbs coming from varying sources depending on what group of folks you fall into. It's really important that you know carbs are not bad. They shouldn't be the first thing you take out of your diet unless they're coming from super crazy, lousy sources. If you are a hard-charging athlete or you're starting a regular training protocol, carbohydrate intake is actually a very crucial part of that, and it's imperative for recovery, performance, sleep, muscle hypertrophy. So a lot of folks do have questions about carb intake and what their levels really should be at and what sources they should be drawing carbs from. And my advice is just reach out on Instagram. We'll try to connect up and I'll give you a little bit of insight into this, and also stay tuned for some of our courses coming out and, of course, custom coaching, where I dive into great detail into this topic. Thanks for listening.